Good morning, and I'm rested Sensei Al Bob. I was really tuckered out last night. It's when your body experiences a shock like I did playing through the air, being a kung fu master and landing on concrete, and not killing myself. When I slowed down, and I was gonna make the video that I'm gonna make now. Then I was just too tired. You heard me. And hey, I'm pushing 70. I'm a pretty fit guy and for a dead guy, and I do all kinds of things that people, oh, hey, you're in pretty good shape. But as my doctor says, I'm the best looking dead guy he's ever seen. The healthiest dead guy. And see, I'm not dead yet. And that's because I understand the connection of my avatar and where my consciousness is, right, in the server. And so I am not confusing the two, so I can use the energetics of my consciousness to keep my avatar going for, longer than the prescribed sell-by date. Because I'm here to do things. Every time I've died 6 times. First time I died was when I was born. Right? And when you talk to people and ask them about their childhood and they can't remember it, that's because it was a shock. Something traumatic happened and they packed it away. And these traumas are manifested by the powers that be, because that's the, MK Ultra butterfly effect of taking control of your avatar and putting in a side block to your higher consciousness that is existing in love's, someone asked me, so what is this, you know, server thing, and our bodies are avatars, and what is that? Well, love is this server. That's where your consciousness is. Your love is in your higher consciousness. When we did a couple of shows ago, I guess it was Wednesday or Thursday night, Wednesday night, I did a guided meditation. So you could go back to that show and just play it and have that experience. That's why I did that. It's there now. You don't have to make excuses for not meditation. Just go there, turn it on, sit in a chair and be comfortable. Don't cross anything, lie down, whatever, and go on a guided meditation. And most of you who responded like, hey, I experienced this, that, and my avatar looked like this, and my brain looked like that, and so the more you do that, the more you experience that, the better you get at it, and the less the reptilian side block can be put in place, and the less you'll be a sheeple. Now, we all live in this material world, experiencing it through our avatars. So we all, even I, can be unconscious. And I guess that's why I had to fly through the air yesterday morning and nearly die again on a concrete floor and then tumble down a staircase. But I didn't, because as I was flying through the air, I became conscious, and my body, my muscle training of my days in the ashram, just spunked up. Like you look at Yoda, and he's hobbling around on his little cane, but when he goes finds the emperor, boy, that guy's spry. Well, I wasn't that spry, but I almost was, because I was twirling through the air and defying gravity going the other direction. So What my great talent is to be in the right place at the right time and be aware of it and take it, say, okay, I'm going to go for this ride. And, one of the things I'm here for is, I tried to sell this school for a good 10, no, not 10 years, 6 years. And John was the guy who bought it, meaning there were 3 or 4 people who would, had signed a contract, was ready, and they died, or they lost all their money, or they got really, the universe didn't want those people here. The universe wanted John here. The universe wanted me to help John, right? So that's what I'm doing. But, I understand that you can't do the same thing over and over again. So that's why I left, When he started throwing me out, instead of like, taking 10 hours and winding him back, I just left. But most times I would take the time because that's what John needed, was someone to listen to him and be his backstop. That's why he got to be where he is that no one's ever been his backstop. So, and we all need backstops, and that's what good friends are. And then when we don't have good friends or family who are there for us, we usually end up in institutions, and the state or your checking account has to pay for it. What you say? Tired of John. I only keep his YouTube. There. Well, if you're tired of John, just come to my channel that you're watching me on right here, Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. And get a hold of me at my YouTube, my Gmail account, the Dude Awake 42 at Gmail, and go read my blog. And, we'll figure out together how you guys can put stuff, because I actually, it's called Griot Press, or publishing, and it's there for you guys to, be there. So anyway, what else is there? Right, so this YouTube's going to be about the interconnectedness of everything. We're all interconnected, right? And so my experience, it seemed like a random element. I was in a library in Dublin, Ireland, in the University at Trinity, in the most sacred, secret library. And, I was in there, and people couldn't understand how this 19-year-old kid, all these guys are old guys, even older than I look now, but I look pretty dapper, as someone said. I'm sporting my spring look just before winter starts, which is going to force me to take John on the road to someplace warm. And we're going to, it's going to be, I'm going to be Donald Trump, and John will be Jimmy. And we will take it across the road and across America. I keep saying, hey, I want to take the band on the road, and if it's only going to be John, I'm sure we'll pick people up along the way. So, and thanks for calling me Sensei Al. So, OWL. But I'm, anyway. So we're all interconnected, right? And so there I was in Ireland, and no one would help me. And then, out of the blue, this woman, I smelled her first, smell you later. I smelled her first, and no one seemed to, they all froze. They knew that smell, and I stared, and it was a homeless lady. It was like a hag, but she wasn't a Walt Disney hag. So you guys have watched all the Illuminati videos about how Disney is like just one gigantic CIA mind control. And I had a girlfriend. Her name was Christine Barton. You could go Google her. Smartest human on the planet. And her first, she has more PhDs than, Carter has pills. And so you go Google her and you see all her PhDs, and they're all very different. A lot of people have 1 or 2 PhDs. And they're all in the same thing, you know, physics, electrical engineering, this, that. Hers are all over the universe. And she was the first human being to render 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional digital platform. And that was her PhD thesis, was that little lamp that's on Pixar. Meaning she started Pixar. You know, she started the algorithm that made it all happen. They kind of bought her out, and you know, she was a woman. This was like the late '80s, early '90s, and you know, they gave her more money. But what it really gave her was street cred. I mean, they got her into the IEEE, which is the most prestigious electrical engineering union, you know, institute, however you want to call it. You know, it was started by Ben Franklin. You know, kind of Tesla was in it, Edison. You know, every well-known everybody was in that anyway. And she started SIGGRAPH, the Special Interest Computer Group. Right. So I've always been drawn to truly amazing women, and they've been drawn to me because I am never in competition. Because how could I be in competition with someone like the Crone or Christine or all the women I've been? They're totally like my first wife, Donna Ann McAdams, who I met on a subway full of Hasidim and Hispanic folk. We were the only white folk, and she was this cute little munchkin wearing her daddy's pea coat, and he was in the Merchant Marines before he was drafted into the Army. And she was shooting pictures out the window. And before, when we were in the tunnel, we were on the J and the M train, and we were going through the tunnel. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in New York subways, you know. So it runs through these dark, seemingly tunnels. They're not. I have to take longer than I'd want to explain what they really are, and that's another story. And and the cars themselves are lit up with fluorescent light, brighter than bright, like daylight, brighter than daylight. And the windows are like mirrors because it's black behind the windows, and they, you know, I don't know why, but they clean the inside of the windows pretty good, so they're very reflective. So you can kind of spy on people by looking in the window. You know, they're over there. You kind of go, don't look straight at them. You look kind of in the window, and that's, you know, part of spycraft 101. And so I'm like, keep an eye on her, and every so often I would look at her in the window, and she'd be looking at me. I go, ooh, she's looking at me. Well, I was the only white guy, and I had a, anyway. You know, I'm wearing tie-dye and crazy clothes, and all the Hasids are wearing white and black. They look just like they're cookies. You know, I saw her, and I kind of, and the JM train goes all through, you know, lower, you know, West Side, Lower Manhattan, cuts across where City Hall and all that is, comes up through Chinatown, and pops out at I forget the name of that station, but it's one of those stations that every train goes through, so you can get from one train to another. Anyway, so, and all these tunnels gone through it all over the place, and there are tons of time travelers there in those stations with all these connecting tunnels. But that's another story, which I will tell you. And if you go read my stories on xrated.blogspot, that's xratted.blogspot.com, you'll read some stories about that. Anyway, so let's see. And then the J and the M train pops out of the ground and goes over the Williamsburg Bridge into Brooklyn, and then down Broadway on the elevated, all the way out to Coney Island. And that's where most of the poor people live, in Brooklyn and out towards Queens. But that's the JFK side of Queens. So anyway, I'm spying her, she's spying me, and she drops her lens cap. And I pick it up, and it's a 50 millimeter and it has written on it Canon. But I know she has a Leica camera because the Germans gave the Japanese a bunch of Leicas, and then the Japanese copied them. And after the war, they were not going to. Canon started out, just reproducing Leica cameras. Now they could do great lenses, but the bodies. I mean, the Germans. So they just made. So all the artists, guys like me and her and other people who were, artist photographers, had Leicas. And so because you couldn't beat, because the way the film was held against the focal plane, you just couldn't beat it. I mean, my Nikon, I had a Nikon because I was a newspaper photographer, and it was great for that. But for more really kind of special, I'd always pull out. And the Hasselblad did the same thing. It had, and it was a 2.25 film. So anyway, so I'm a photographer. I realize that she is. So I pick up the lens camera, and she's got the camera like under her coat, and she's like taking out and taking pictures out the window of the view of the East River. And she's actually taking pictures of my loft. Because I had a loft that was right on, in Williamsburg Bridge, right on the river, right next to the Domino. I was between the Domino Sugar Factory and the beer guys. And so, because that whole side of the East River back in the 1860s till after World War II were chemical plants, DuPont and all those guys. Before they went to Maryland, that's where they were. So she's taking pictures, and I'm like standing, she's like about 5, 6 or 7. I'm 6 foot, and I'm just standing there, and she turns around and goes, "Whoa!" And there I am, and I hand her lens cap, and it says Canon on it, and I go, "So you got a Leica?" And it's like the secret handshake, and she was like, "Oh, you're a photographer too?" I mean, because it was like the secret handshake. And I go, "Oh, yeah, I got a Leica. I got a Hasselblad. I got, I start wrapping it up. And I say, "And what you're taking pictures of is my loft." Because you live over there. And what I had done, so I had a 17,000 square foot loft. And I had come back from Ireland in for like the 5th time in 1974, end of 74. It was right about now, September to October. And I could always, New York was my town. I could be away a year or 2 or 3, and I could walk back, get work, find a place to stay, just slide right in. And it was like I was never there. You're never gone, I would go into bars and have conversations with guys at the bar that I had the day I left, and like they didn't even notice I was gone. So I looked around, Soho was totally, lawyered up with yuppies. And Tribeca was just starting to change. And the old guys who owned buildings that I used to fix things for, they were all dead, and those buildings were already being bought up by lawyers. And my space on Duane Street, I used to work for the guys who had Hotel Bar Butter, and they, I forgot the old guy's name, but he died, and the son took over and made it corporate, and half of Duane, all of Chamber Street, everything below, 3 blocks on either side of Chamber Street was the egg and butter district, and especially over near Duane Park and Duane Street. And there were all these gigantic lofts that were gigantic refrigerators, like 5,000 square foot refrigerators, and the walls were like 4 foot thick of cork because they didn't have the kind of insulations they have now. And the refrigeration they had was not what they have now. They had ammonia. And I used to fix those, and that's why I was such a good buddy with Mr. Hotel Bar and Butter, because no one would touch these things because ammonia is deadly, And I had a spacesuit, and I'd go in and fix it for him, and because, you know, for him to change everything at that time, he'd have to change his whole business model. And after he died, his son built, you know, places in Maryland and New Jersey and out in, you know, so, you know, more centrally located distribution instead of just New York City. Because Hotel Bar and Butter, as its name is, its primary, up until, you know, the 70s, its primary clients were hotels that had restaurants. Anyway, so I came back and I had no place that I could find. So I picked up a copy of the Village Voice. And because that was always the go-to thing to go to. And I, you know, picked it up and I went through the list and I saw, oh, look, Spring Street. Oh, there's a restaurant for rent. And, you know, it said, like, offer, you know, make an offering for rent. So I knew it must have been, I knew exactly where it was near the UPS building. I went over there and there's an old workers bar. It had the second oldest liquor license in New York City, right? Like in the world. So I'm walking down Spring Street and I have the Village Voice in my hand. And I bump into this guy because I'm looking, there are all these old decrepit buildings that no one's in, they're boarded up. And I'm just going up and down Spring Street, you know, between Varick and Water Street and West Street. And I'm like looking, I'm going, where is this place? It should be right here. And I bump into this guy who looks like Richie Cunningham. He's got orange hair like a carrot, freckles. And it was Richard Heyman, right? And I bump into him, and he's got the Village Voice in his hand too, and he has the same advertisement circled, right? We both do. And he goes, are you the real estate guy? And I go, what real estate guy? He goes, well, I made a phone call, and I tracked down the guy who is the real estate guy for this, and I have an appointment to meet him. So, just as we're talking, this guy, cab comes and he's in a suit and he goes, you Cunningham? And Richie goes, yeah. And so, you know, the guy has the keys. He opens it up and like there were bats and you name it. And the smell was like ungodly. And the floor was like this because the whole west side of New York was a swamp. And they just threw garbage in it. And when it, you know, you didn't sink in it, they started building things on it. And that was one of these buildings built in the 1860s. So, you know, the guy goes, so what do you want to rent? And I said, $100. And he like looks at me and Richie goes, $500. And the guy goes, how about $600? And Richard and I look at each other and we go, okay. And so the guy, you know, we didn't have to sign a lease. He hands us the keys. He gives us a card and he goes, do you boys have any money? And Richard had $1,000 in his pocket, or he had his checkbook, but he had $1,000. So he either wrote him a check or gave him the cash, and that, you know, placated the guy. And the guy said, listen, this place has, you know, one of the oldest liquor licenses. You go down to the city, they'll give you a liquor license immediately, like for $50. You won't have to hire a guy like me to pay thousands to get one. I go, So Richard and I, you know, we both have our flashlights and we're exploring the place, and it's a total mess. And the back wall was like kind of boarded up, and I just thought it was plywood over windows. So I was pushing, and I pushed the whole frigging wall of the back of the building. And luckily there was no floors above it. This was like an extension they kind of built that was part of the dining room. And it just fell back, and there was a lot that was, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet below. And it had, you know, weeds that had been growing there so long they were turning into trees. And it looked like it had been a parking lot for some other business that no longer existed. Luckily, there were no cars parked there because this gigantic wall of plywood fell down and chunks of brick and cinder blocks were on top of that. And anyway, so it pushed all those weedy trees down. And Richard comes over and goes, that'll make a great patio. And he like thought just like me. So we clean as much as we can. We go upstairs, and there was a beautiful, gigantic Victorian apartment up there, but it was slid like that. Meaning, if you were wearing roller skates, you would always end up on the other side. And they had bedrooms and bathrooms and beautiful kitchen and a great living room. So we said, okay, we can live with this. So we just pushed out the windows in the back of that apartment and just started throwing all the garbage. Forget a dumpster. We did what good 1880s New Yorkers would do. We threw all the garbage out into that back lot. Well, there was a nice foundation of the plywood wall and bricks and cinder blocks. And, we just kept throwing shit until we kind of pretty much cleaned everything out. And both the downstairs and the upstairs, we pushed out the windows. And so there was lots of sunlight. And there were two big skylights in the apartment, and we uncovered them. And they were in actual pretty good shape. I mean, they didn't leak. There were no broken, it wasn't like about to fall in. And the roof was meaning when they closed this place up, the one thing they did, which was smart, was they, made the roof so it wouldn't leak, because the way you destroy a building is through roof leaks. So anyway, Richie and I, and we worked great together. Like within 3 hours, we had cleaned the whole place out, broomed it out. It was, the smell was gone. Sunlight was streaming in. It was one of those Indian summer weeks where it was like in the 70s and 80s and in the 60s at night, instead of right now where it's in the 50s during the day and 30s at night. And like I said, Richie and I worked great. It's like we were telepathically connected. We didn't have to like this morning, I woke up and made John breakfast. And there is a section of the school that's basically turned into a gigantic closet. That's what I used it for. And then when I moved out of here, got a lot of space. And John just basically did the same thing. Just put all the stuff. But instead of being orderly, it's just like stuff all over the place. Like if you watched his last Jimmy, where he's saying, I am a woman. And he basically looked at a squirrely little plant, but next to it was a stinging nettles, which is what got his leg. And he went up to the kitchen to wash it off, which is the worst thing you can do with stinging nettles. It just kind of, but stinging nettle, not like poison ivy or poison oak. It doesn't cause you to have a rash for weeks. It goes away in a couple hours. So you could just leave it alone. And the thing, if you really, the best thing to do is urinate on the spot that the stinging nails got you. So, but when Johnny Boy was washing it, you could take a look at his kitchen, and that's what this storage room looks to the 10th power. So this morning I knew it was that way, and it's it might rain, it's a little cloudy. And I wanted to help John out, so I was just going to spend an hour or two and make things orderly, because he always says, oh, your stuff's in there. Well, no, I've taken my stuff out. Yeah, I got a box or two stuck around, but all that stuff is his. So I was just going to because I have a lot of, if you ever want to organize anything, you need a table to put things on, put it in boxes, put it in bags, put it in a corner. That's how you organize. So I started doing that, and John came out and spent a whole half an hour just walking in circles, going, because he had drank a couple cups of coffee, and he was off to the races. And, woke up at 5 and drank a couple cups of coffee. And anyway, so I brought him downstairs and had him meditate, and it calmed him down enough. So I said, why don't you go up and take a nap, which he's doing now. But so in the time that John went on about, what do we do? Oh, you can't move that. And every time I went to pick up a box and put things out in it to put in a corner, he's okay, do that. We have to, he'd hyperventilate. Whereas Richie and I worked together like one mind. And so in 4 hours, we cleared out a 4,000 square foot space. Of course, gravity helped us. We had the back wall of the restaurant was pushed out. We just pushed everything that was rotting and terrible out, you know. And once we pushed the thing, all the birds and chipmunks and raccoons ran away, and the rats, you know, left. And so, you know, within 4 hours, we had to clean that place. And we had, you know, I just had a pack. Richard had a car, and over by the, you know, there was one of those places nobody was, so you could park there. And there was a lot, not a lot, an alley that was part of this place that went down to the lot behind. So Richie just kind of, and there was a door that went into the restaurant and some steps that went up to the you know, the apartment above. So within 4 hours, we had cleaned the whole place out to really nice shape. I had figured out the electricity, the gas, and everything was basically on. Meaning I didn't have to steal anything, you know. So I took the numbers of where everything was, you know, and I had, you know, I'd been an electrician by this time, almost 22 years in New York City. I knew all the inspectors. I called up the Con Ed guy, called up the city guy. I said, you know, what are you doing now? I don't know. I said, I'll buy a, you know, a donut. Come on, you know. I gave them the address. They showed up. And that day, they entered into their little book, you know, Richie and, you know, and we had this thing, you know, canceled check from the real estate guy. So that was more than enough for these guys. So they didn't have to do anything. Everything was on. The fact that I called them up the day that we cleaned things out and took the numbers down was like the act of good faith, these guys. So they said, great, no problem. They knew me, not a problem. So they entered in the book. You know, we got our bill, because when you have a utility bill, it is the gold standard of you belong there, right? And I knew that if anybody from any establishment would come, we could just say, hey, look. And the first thing that we put up on the wall wasn't our liquor license, wasn't, you know, the health department, you know, letter. We put up our first bill of gas and electric. We put in a little thing and put it behind the bar. Anyway, so and then, you know, it's like 2 in the afternoon. We had, like, you know, started about 8 in the morning, and we had, you know, cleaned the place out, set up the apartment where to live. There were 2 nice beds up there that were not, you know, you could sleep on them. They were comfy. They didn't have rat poop or you know, mice living in them. It was actually quite nice. You know, Richie got the 4-poster. I got the queen size. And so we went downtown and went to my favorite store. It was called Job Lots. And Job Lots is kind of what Lowe's has turned into. And so in that place, or, you know, Walmart's, because it had everything. It had, you know, tools and paint and everything you'd ever want. Plus it also had, you know, towels and you know, linen and stuff like that. So we bought some stuff, and there was I think there was a sale on nice linen, you know, and we decided to buy a bunch of it to make drapes for the restaurant, because there were this whole wall that had no wall. So, and it was going to get cold soon rather than later. So we what we did do, they also had rolls of really thick plastic, not like drop cloth, but thick, the kind of plastic that people make you know, awnings out of. And so we got a couple of rolls of that. And Rich had money. I had zip. And pretty much, you know, when they put the electric bill, they put it in Rich's name. You know, the lease went into Rich's name. The gas bill went into Rich's name because he had money. He had a checking account. I didn't. I had just gotten back from being in Ireland for a year. But Rich was a guy who's like a backstop. He was like my brother. He is my brother. I haven't seen him in years, but like I said, we when we talked, we joked, we had fun, we laughed, we had the best of times. When we went out, we were like, wild and crazy guys, you know, from Saturday Night Live. But we weren't, you know. He was a Midwestern Irish guy, and I was a New Yorker. Anyway, who lived in Ireland. So that first day, we cleaned it out. We had the electricity, the gas turned on in his name. The lease was in his name. We went down to the liquor license lady, and we charmed her, and we showed the our lease, our electric bill, and our gas bill, and she was like very, very impressed. She goes, "Boys, you've done this all in one day," and said, "And we're here to get the liquor license." And she goes, "Well, I've looked it up, and you have the second old next to this other tavern in Lower East Side, which was the Irish Tavern. I think it's Francis's Tavern. I'm not quite sure, but anyway." She goes, "Not a problem." She takes out the thing, she writes stuff on it, she hits it with a stamp, right? And it cost us less. She goes, "Normally, but because this is so old, it's prorated, da 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 da, $32.86. Richie gave him the $32.86 from his checkbook. Because Richie was great, because he knew paying with checks was the paper trail he was looking for. So he does that. And I said, "So, let's take you out for a drink. Honey, you're cute. Let's go." And she goes, "Well, oh, I really can't. It's like only 3:30. I'm supposed to leave at 5:30. Oh, no one's here. Just close the door." And we almost got her out the door. She goes, "No, no, no." But she goes, "Boys, I know I live on the west side. So why don't you come to this bar where I hang out?" It was kind of near McDougal Street. And I said, "Oh, I know exactly where that is. Yep, we'll see you there at 7. How's that?" And she goes, "That's great." So we go back to the bar, the Spring Street place, and who is waiting for us? Not waiting for us. They already have the key to the place. It was the mob. And Richie and I have like bags of this and bags of that, linen and stuff we were going to clean it. And those guys are in there, and they got their Hispanic crew and these Polish guys really scrubbing everything down, right? And they have like already replaced the chiller that was downstairs where you put the barrels of beer. That had like rotted away. They already replaced it with this beautiful aluminum thing, and they had already, wired up compressors, and they had replaced all of the refrigerators behind the bar, and they were stocking the bar. They had cleaned the bar up, and like, put oil on it so it looked great, and it was like, whoa, who are you guys? "I am Tony. Bobby Bentno sent me. He's one of Mike Finelli's, and Mike heard that you opened a bar, and he's so proud. He loves you. He loves you more than any of us. You're like his honest son." And he's talking about me because I had been Mike Finelli's electrician, since I was like 15. And every one of his made men were always trying to get me to do something. "Hey, I got this great deal. You make $100,000. Blah, blah, blah." And I said, "No, sorry, I can't do that. I'm trying to stay on the up and up. I want to get my license. I can't just, oh, we'll buy you your license. And I said, "No, no, just, And Mike really loved it because I always, I had a beeper, basically for him. And I would be there, whatever I was doing. I'd drop it all, go and fix his whatever, right? And I would never say, "Oh, that'll be X amount of dollars." I would just fix it. And then I'd go in the back where his aunt was, and it wasn't just a bar, but it had a great restaurant. And Soho and so he was making a fortune out of the Soho yuppies because there was no real restaurant there. At least on that side. He was on the east side of Spring Street. So he controlled everything from Mott all the way over to Varick Street on Spring. And so, he controlled Soho, basically. So I would just go and fix things for him, and then go in the back, and his aunt would make me, eggplant parmesan or spaghetti and meatballs, or she had about 5 really amazing things that he loved. And she always had it kind of ready to serve him at any moment. So I'd go back there and she'd, what do you want? And then he would come back and he'd have an envelope for me, and so the job, if it was just any Joe Blow, I'd fix the fluorescent light or the fan in one of his chillers, or he had these push button things, or he had his little security system, or he had a bunch of things that would, screw up all the time. And I'd just go and fix it because I'd fix it up 100 times. And I'd always go, Mike, why don't you just let me take this out and put in something that won't have to be fixed? He goes, oh, no, I just fix it, because he liked the fact that I'd have to come back and fix it. That's how he saw me, right? Because I would be doing all this other stuff. But he kind of, got me on my pager. I drop everything and go see him. I mean, if he just would, page me, hey, come and see me, I would come and see him. So anyway, Richie and I, this is the first day. Now it's like we're open for business. We got booze on the rack. We got the kitchen was, because the place, it used to be run by a dwarf, and I don't know why, but about four other worker bars that I knew were run by dwarfs. Maybe it was, the dwarf mob that ran worker bars. I'm not quite sure. In the, late part of the 19th century and early part of the 20th. I'm not quite sure. But so the counters in the kitchen were about 3 feet from the floor. Like mid-thigh to me, right? And when the mobster cleanup guys, they went in there and cleaned it up, but they were like, they didn't really fix anything or get it going, because they basically didn't know what to do with it. I mean, it had a beautiful Garland stone, had a Bain Marie, had really great refrigeration, but it was like 3 feet from the floor, So I said, well, we'll figure that out. We'll just serve booze and sandwiches. We won't, get into the food thing yet. And so, they said fine, and they brought in boxes and boxes of tablecloths and napkins and towels, and Richard and I, we didn't buy box, we bought some, but they brought in everything, plates and you name it, they brought it in. And booze, and beer, and they put in a new tap system. We had like 12 really pretty good beers. And we had everything that Mike had, and he just had his boys go to his warehouse and bring up whatever they thought we'd need. But it was so sweet when Bobby Bentno said, "Mike's so proud of you, Al. You're like his son. We're like his nephews, but you're like his son. He loves you, And that's why we can't fuck you up, We'd take you out a long time ago, but." And we've learned to love you too, You're like our patron saint. You do all this crazy shit, you do all this stuff, and it reflects so well on us, You're like our united way. So anyway, and I'm on the other, this place is on the other side. So I call up a whole bunch of my friends, because they put a phone in too, So they put in a pay phone. They put in 4 payphones so they could come in and run their numbers, right? and have food and booze on the arm, Anyway, so we have a big party, and this is the first frigging day, right? So all my buddies come, all my art friends, all my intelligentsia and beat friends. Herbert Berghoff, who actually was just a few blocks away, he comes, Uda and him come, and my buddy from Pig Lights came, and all the other theater people I know, and so it's a great party, right? White bread sandwiches, bologna, American cheese, and you know, booze. Everyone's drunk. Anyway, so we're having a great time, and you know, the party goes until sunset, and you know, Richie and I don't even get upstairs, and we go up there, and there are, you know, people sleeping on the floor, people sleeping in our bed. You know, we kick everybody out. A few of the folks who aren't that drunk say, "How can we help you?" So we get them to, you know, um, go get paint and other plaster and stuff like that. And you know, because my friends were painters and plasterers, the guys who, "How can we help you?" And my buddy's a plumber. You know, he got our bathroom working upstairs and downstairs. And then he went to the kitchen. He goes, "You know, that thing is only 3 feet, you know, comes up to," and he was a short guy, it's up to my knee. I said, "Yeah, boy, I haven't figured that one out." So he was an architect before he became a plumber. That's where we kind of met over at Cooper Union. He was going to architect school. And that's where he met his beautiful wife, Helene. And Helene and I, like, we must have been brothers and sisters in another life, because it took about 15 years she always loved me, but she hated me too. So, but after about 15 years of me always being there for both of them, and her particularly, and, you know, no matter. And she goes, "Yeah, okay." But from day one, we were like brothers and sisters, love hate kind of thing. But and I could always make her laugh, so that was, you know, allowed me to be in her life. But anyway, so there, you know, and so he gets this brilliant idea, and he looks underneath, and he goes, "You know, there's not even a basement under there; it's just silt." So what he did was he went and got some bums on the road and gave them shovels to shovel the dirt out into the basement down below, because it was a gigantic basement, and over in that corner was just like the wall was swelling down. So he got them to, you know, we built a wall, and they shoved dirt against it that would support the floor above. So now the kitchen floor was 5 foot in the ground. So now the counters were about 6, 7 feet from the bottom of that hole. So he runs all the plumbing pipes. He fills it in with gravel. He puts thin set. He puts plywood and thin set, and then tile, because he was a tile guy too. And it was beautiful, right? And you went. He got it so these guys built, like, not steps, but like a ramp that went from the back part of the of the dining room, and it ramped around and down into the kitchen. And it made the kitchen much longer, because when it was, you know, the dwarf kitchen, it was only about 12 by 12, and this made it like 25 by 12. And then he took, you know, he and I had built so many restaurants together. So, you know, and all the equipment was good. So we set it you know, up, you know, the Garland stove. It was a nice, I think it was 9 burner stove, 2 ovens, and a Garland and a fryolator, and you know, a dishwasher, and a gigantic stainless steel sink with a sliding thing, and 2 Bain Maries, and under the counter refrigeration, and a really big kind of walk-in, big gigantic refrigerator that you kind of would go into. It wasn't a real walk-in. All the condensers down below, and the chillers, or, you know, the compressors down below in the basement, and the condensers in the refrigeration. And so, you know, by the end of the week, we were really open to go. And the last thing I fixed, because I didn't have a ladder, there was a sign hanging out into Spring Street that you could see. It was hanging so far out from the east side. If you had good eyes and you looked straight down Spring Street to the west side, you kind of have to be Superman to see this. But if you had binoculars or periscope or telescope, you could see that sign. So I tried to light it up, and it wouldn't light up. So, you know, I needed a tall ladder, so I had to get my buddy to bring, you know, get his truck and bring over a tall ladder. And he was a neon guy too. So we're up there on this ladder, and we're playing with the transformers. And We basically kind of electrocute ourselves and it explodes because this thing was like wired in the 1890s and it had tube and peg wiring, meaning not pipe or, and it was just bare copper of conductors up there. And so we, and nearly fell off the ladder and had the big explosion and the sign lit up. But it said bar, and the two tits of the B wouldn't light up. No matter what we did, wouldn't light up. So it lit up and it said ear. So the bar, the two little tits of the E, of the B, didn't light up, so it had ear. And so we named the bar the Ear Inn. So go Google Ear Inn, and I'm sure you'll see a ton about Richard Heyman. And I'll be, as I always am, in the background picture, smiling, So Richard and I Richard was probably there 20 years. Because, man, he had that place was amazing. So Richard was the front man because he was just so cute with that red hair and freckles, and he's really tall like the Jolly Green Giant, and he's really well-spoken, and he's really, he is the non-lecherous Garrison Keillor. And, he was just the sweetest, nicest guy to everybody, was always there. Everyone, all the guys who I knew who would kill you in a nickel but loved me, loved Richie too, right? And Richard was truly amazing composer. So he was had the beautiful apartment upstairs, and he was like me. He had loads of friends who would come and stay. So the bedrooms, I had my one bedroom, but there was an attic to this thing too, right? And it had this beautiful staircase. There's the outside staircase, and then you went into the apartment, and right there was this beautiful staircase, like straight out of some 1930s movie, mahogany, the whole ball of wax, up to a beautiful skylight, and then the whole, 75 foot long, 30 feet wide, was open and had a ton of skylights and a bathroom up there. So after we got going, I found a gigantic roll of green chunk of carpet, and somebody threw away, and that was New York. People threw stuff away that you couldn't believe. So, I kind of got a cab, had the cabbie guy say, I'll give you an extra $20. Here, let me tie this on top of your cab. Drove it home. I eyed it, and Richie and I carried it up there. We rolled it out. It fit perfectly. I mean, perfectly. It was unbelievable. So I said, okay, Rich, this is my apartment. And I turned my bedroom over to one of Richard's, Midwestern teachers. And she was this old woman of 75, and she was a great composer, relatively famous, of a Midwestern set. And she had gone to California and did movies, but she loved to paint, but never really got there at it. So she, that was her room, because it was a nice little apartment, it had beautiful windows out over our dumpster backyard. And anyway, so I had upstairs, and I had, by this time, it's like getting towards spring. And I'm already doing 20 other things. But, so our bar is going great. And we are like a workers' bar, because workers' bar normally just had sandwiches. The guy who ran this, he probably had what they call blue plate specials. So because there was no restaurants on that side of the west side, like from the Battery up to the West Village, there was nothing. And, Westbeth had started to be a dream, which was a place, it was an old phone interchange, and it was being replaced by the Long Lines building in Tribeca, which is, go look up Long Lines. That is something scary. That's where Darth Vader lives. I worked on that because I was, top-notch local 3 IB guy, had all the clearances, blah blah blah, and it's a scary. I worked in a lot of scary. I worked in Los Alamos, San Diego, Kirkland Air Force Base, and this story is gonna end up in those places, connected to the old Crone and Matham, Olga Kluber. Everything's connected. So the old lady gets my room. I'm living upstairs, and basically we start a restaurant. People keep saying, "Oh, we want you to have, Al, you're a great cook." Because every so often I would, because I love to cook for people, and I would go. I had a shopping cart, and I would go up 10 blocks to about 16th Street to where on the west side where the meat district is, right? And I would take Richie's, Midwestern station wagon down to the egg and butter district, and I would go through dumpsters and get, the meat district. The guys would throw out half a cow. It was too, instead of cutting it up, they would, if it was too hard, it had too much grizzle or too much this or it was rotting, they would throw it in. I would just take it away. And I'd go down to the egg and butter. There'd be whole wheels of cheese, had mold on it. I'd take it away, cut the mold off. You'd have a whole wheel of cheese. Went to the vegetable market, and they'd have crates of stuff that was like sell by date, and the restaurants wouldn't buy them. So I would take that away. They were in dumpsters. Now, I knew all the garbage guys because, Mike Pinelli ran the carting business for the restaurants because he ran the linen and tablecloths, and he ran the booze. So, his carting company, he would take the garbage away. So instead of having to dump it in a landfill, they would take it over to our backyard dump. Not, fill it up with food so the rats would come in, but what they thought was pretty good, they would throw there or bring it into the kitchen or whatever. I'd make them something to eat, and that's how things work. It's called on the arm. And so I started the Dumpster Dive restaurant in the Ear Inn. And Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were the days it was open. And Thursday was, lunch and dinner, from about 11 till about whenever we closed, 3 a.m. Friday was, again, 11 till whenever we closed. Saturday was, I was open for breakfast, and I basically ran that kitchen from 7 in the morning Saturday till 7 in the morning or 10 in the morning on Monday. And you could get breakfast or whatever, but it was mostly a brunch, right? Because I was a real brunch guy. And we had a cappuccino machine. We were like one of the first cappuccino, Mike had a cappuccino machine. He got me one. He brought it in. Yeah, you can have my old one. I just got a new one. And then about 4 weeks later, he brought the new one back. So I like the old one. I'm taking it back. Anyway, because it was almost computer operated. He couldn't figure out which button to push. But anyway, so for another 6 months up until July, so we got there in around September, and I was, really, really there until September. And then I started getting other things I was doing. I was doing more art, and we were starting to trade food for art, which I said, Rich, you're going to be able to retire on this one. And, the guy who did OK Harris, the guy who did Montana Palace. The first two guys were big-time art gallery guys. They were up on 57th Street, and then when Soho kind of took off, they came down, and they were my buds. And so they used to pay me to have these kind of underground art galleries, And I met Phil and Jane Baer, and we had the Una Baer Gallery on Broome Street. And they got us that space and got us our first 4 years of like $200 rent. And that was one of the central cultural zones. Because Phil and Jane, Broome Street, all the traffic from the Long Island Expressway comes over onto the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway and then comes into Manhattan, either on the Manhattan Bridge or on the Brooklyn Bridge, and then dumps out on either Canal Street or Broome Street. And it's this little teeny street. And so all day long, there's a zillion trucks and cars creeping from, the Bowery over to the Holland Tunnel. And they just kind of, because they have to go by lights, there's about 10 blocks where they're, and they kind of creep. And there was this window in our gallery that was about, 7 feet above the roadway. So if you're walking on the sidewalk, you couldn't see it. But if you were in a big semi and you were way up there at a steering wheel, you could look right in that window. And it was a big window, big bay window, like, 10 feet long, 6 feet high. And it was in a room. And I don't know, it looked like something like this place might have been a early form of Macy's, and this was one of those windows where they showed stuff off. But anyway, Phil and Jane they were born and bred in the Midwest, and came, and both their parents were like Methodist ministers, but they went to Berkeley for art, like in the 60s. They were my age, they were that generation, and they were actually a little older than I was. And so when they showed up in New York I met them and said, hey, and they were so cool because they were like as Midwestern as you could, but they were as freaky as you could even imagine. So they were just my kind of people. So first they were kind of hanging out at the ear. Well, no. These guys were way before the ear in. Probably at there was I had a loft on Worcester Street, my Benny loft. I fixed all these lofts that were factories, when I was working for Mike Stoll. And Benny was the super for all these factories, about 10 of them. But all the basements were interconnected, and he had brothels and gambling, opium, marijuana, you name it, and it was going 24/7. It never closed. So, he's a businessman running that. He couldn't, bother being a super. He had to pretend he was being the super because that was what gave him the access to these spaces. So he paid me pretty good to, not do the elevator stuff. He got other people to run the elevators, but fixing everything, cleaning this and putting light bulbs in the hallways. And I had a 7,000 square foot loft on Worcester Street. And when that loft got sold, finally, the people who live in it now paid $80 million for the loft that I lived in. It was beautiful. And so it had no electricity. It had, back in the day, Edison wired everything with DC. And so, when AC came in, people got AC. But the DC, because it was also running the trains, they could never turn it off. So all they did was cut the cables and build a box around it and pour tar in it. That was it. So when I got up there, instead of, because it was on the 7th floor, and so what I did was I built a rectifier, which changes DC into AC, and I had these gigantic, nails that were like a foot long, made out of copper, and I welded welding cable to them, and I drove them with a sledgehammer through the tar into the copper cables that were like the size of elephants' legs, and went into the rectifier, and bingo, I had 100 amps of AC current, very clean. So that's where I lived, and that's where the Bears first came in. And then the guy from OK Harris, I wish I could remember him. His name will pop into my head, but I can, and so a gorilla and a Hasidic Jew. And so, anyway, we had this, he got us this gallery, and, I had all these art friends, like Judy Ripka, Keith Haring, Julian Schnabel, Kiki Smith, John Bowman, and Alan Sarrett, and a whole bunch more. Marilyn Minter, And we were all just still kids, you know, and we were the folks who first moved into Lofton and Soho. And we were the ones who, like, arm wrestled Mayor Lindsay. We went into, hey, listen, stop bugging us. We're not stealing anything. We're paying, but you're living in a commercial space. You can't live there. Hey, you let us do our thing. We will turn this cesspool into a bar of gold. And look what it is now, Soho, south of Houghton. So we were in John Lindsay's office with a map of Lower Manhattan. Everyone was smoking Cubans, drinking VSO, and with magic markers marking off neighborhoods that we wanted to have legal residence, ability to, if you're an artist, you can be there doing whatever the fuck you want, right? Now, Andy Warhol, he was a smart guy, because when we were all doing this fighting the city, I mean, literally, they'd send cops in and arrest us and do all kinds of, turn our electricity off. We were paying the bills, you know? We weren't stealing anything. And so, Andy, he called his place the Factory and got it leased as the Factory. So when the city and the utilities looked at, oh, that's a factory, because it was a factory building. Anyway, on Union Square. So we open up Una Bear Gallery because, you know, my place was beautiful and great, and they loved it, and everyone did, and I had great parties up there, but it was on the 7th floor, and, you know, no one knew where it was, which was fine by me. I was happy about that. So we get the Una Bear Gallery on Broome Street, and I had a friend, his name was Ralston Farina, and this guy was just amazingly brilliant, but totally caustic. He only had, the worst thing he could say. And he'd say it to you, and you go, I hate this guy, he's an asshole. Which, you know, if you want to be a famous artist, you mostly have to schmooze and be nice to rich people. And he would just like, and there were a ton of artists I knew who would be world famous today if they had only been able to schmooze with people. And part of this story is going to be about Gary Blue. So anyway, so Ralston, you know, showed up on my door. He needed a place to stay. And Phil and Jane were great, because no matter how caustic Ralston was, they didn't care, because they were smoking so much pot that they didn't care, right? They thought he was cute. They would pat him on the head. He goes, such a cute little monkey. And, you know, after that, you know, no matter what he could say to them, he goes, you know, Al, they're just like you. You know, you're my friend. I mean, why I like you, why you like, you know, you're my friend. I know I can say anything to you and you're not going to get mad or hold it against me. And you only see the best in me. I go, that's right, Lawson. I love you, buddy. And we would have the best of times. He and I took a lot of road trips, and it was like a cross between almost suicide and having the most fun. Because when he would say these things to people, either they would laugh hysterically or they'd want to kill us. So, and I had a couple of friends like that. Like Houston Haynes, who was the first Marlboro Man. He was another guy like that. And the two other guys, their names are, but, you know, I kind of love, they're like, you know, hurt animals, you know? I mean, why is John my friend? People are, you know, why are you even hanging out with that guy? He's like, you know, what are you, No, he needs a friend. I'm here for him. Now, I can leave, because, you know, I'm not stuck here. I don't need John. But we can do some interesting things, and we've done. We did those videos, and there was annoying the way he basically, you know, took it over and wouldn't even, you know. So he's up there now, either asleep or editing the me being Elvis. And I said, now, okay, John, you want to do a whole bunch of new videos on your channel? You have to link them to my channel. You have to give me credit, and if they make money, you got to give me at least chump change, you know? Meaning he always goes, oh, but you cost me so much money. No. Meaning, since I've been here, I've made him meals. You know, I showed up here with about $28 to my name. You know, so I've been going down to the supermarket every day buying about three, I buy two things of celery, a couple of things of carrots, an onion, you know, and then I make him a dinner and then I make him the next dinner, and then the next day I go out and I spend another $3. Now I'm down to 28 cents, and he keeps saying, "But you're costing me so much money. Oh, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills." And so I wanted to go clean upstairs for him because he wanted to hire someone and pay them $500 to clean up a closet. You know. At minimum. Anyway, so we're there at the Unabare Gallery, and Ralston is doing performance art out on the street, right? And he is kind of garnishing some kind of positive attention because when he is on, he is amazing, right? And we would go down to, Washington Square where guys were busking and playing. And he was a really good chess player. And so he would make some money playing chess. And he would do stand-up comedy. No one did stand-up comedy in the early 70s anywhere, especially not on the street. So anyway, so we had Jane and Phil Bear, me, and we had the basement. And the basement was this really amazing. This building was built in the 18-somethings. And the basement was brick, and the ceilings were brick, and they were, cathedral domed. I don't know if people could even do this anymore, but the way they put the bricks, it was like holding the floor up that we were standing on, right? And the basement went out into the street because when this thing was built, they had no electricity, and so the sidewalks were these cast iron sidewalks that had places where big thick glass could be put in it. So they were like walkable skylights, really big ones too, like 10 feet wide, the whole length of the block. So light would, and because this was a long street, and at the end of it where West Broadway was at Broome Street, there was a big open area. It was called the Five Corners back in the day. There were a number of Five Corners, and there was always where there was a ghetto, because different nationalities would meet at the Five Corners. Go watch the movie Gangs of New York. You'll see what I'm talking about. So, and that's a great movie because it really tells a really good shot at what we're going through right now. Because the movie opens with this guy who's Dutch, right? He's the Dutch were the first guys in New York City, right? And he's like the last of like the Mike Finelli versions, the mobsters of the Dutch. And the Dutch make the Italian look like Martha Stewart. I mean, the Dutch, just look what they did to the Congo. King Leopold, go. Nobody reads history. So anyway, go read Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky, Christopher Hitchens, a guy who wrote a book, Everything My High School Teacher told me is a lie. Anyway, and there's so many books that people wrote, oh, we have free speech. Forget about it. Meaning there's thousands of books that have been written that are great that kind of got published, but the publisher only published the publisher knew, like Random House and a few others would publish some pretty interesting books, but they were connected to the uber rich. So if the uber rich, Mr. Rockefeller didn't want that story about, the muckraking of what he did, well, they wouldn't, they would pay the writer off and, publish maybe 100 of his books, and that would be it. You'd never see that book again. And why that happened was Marx and Engels were reporters for that New York Herald Tribune, and the guy who owned it was really cheap, and they were over in Europe. They were his European guys, and they were sending stories, and he was paying them $5 a story. I mean, it might take them months to do the research and go around and talk to people. and he'd pay him $5. And that's when they decided to start, that's why communism got started, because of the cheapskate um, publisher of the Herald Tribune. But I love that. When that paper was out, that was a great paper. Anyway, so there we were on Broome Street, and Ralston's doing performance art. And we're doing art shows because we're getting paid by the 57th Street galleries to have these art shows, because they didn't want to put their name on somebody who was not going to be profitable. They wanted a done deal. And so we'd have an art show, and they were paying our rent, and they were paying, whenever we needed some money, I could go visit. What was that guy's name who had, anyway, and and when they came down, I built their galleries, and their restaurants, and that's why I became the guy who built nightclubs, restaurants, and art galleries. So, they give us an envelope of cash, we'd have a good time. And they loved the fact that we could throw a killer party. And they had their openings up there on 57th Street and their galleries up there with all the snooty people. And we would bring, after they would come down to our show and pick, I like this guy. Oh, Judy Rivka, she's really hot. She's a really great artist. Oh, bring her to one of our openings. And that's where they would make their first connection to the rich folk. They would schmooze. And that was the other thing I was supposed to be looking for, were artists that could schmooze the rich. Because the rich loved the fact that they were shoulder to shoulder to some artists. Yeah, they could buy a Vincent van Gogh painting for $500,000 in the 70s. But Vin was dead. These folks were alive. So that was my gig, right? So I had all these things going on, and I was still hanging out at, the Ear Inn. I still had my carpeted attic. That was like, I could go, I had my writing desk, had a big window looking out onto, because everything south of there was like gone. They were going to build, they built the World Trade Center in the early 70s, and they destroyed the whole west side, tore it down, because they were going to build condos for all of the people who were going to work in those factories, into the World Trade Center, which were like office factories. And whatchamacallit, so they have all these nice planned, right? And that was, they were starting to build a thing called Live, and everything got stopped. So they tore everything down, but it stopped. And they were going to build this thing called the Marina, which is there now, in front of the World Trade Center, where the really rich people could bring their gigantic yachts. And all the dirt they dug out for the World Trade Center, and it's not just two towers, but there were other buildings, building 7. That means there was building 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then there was building 8, 9, and 10. So they took all that dirt and they made a gigantic landfill. Like, that's what the whole west side was stuff like that, making land. But this landfill was a 1/4 mile wide and 3 miles long. It went from where Radio Row had been, just below, right where the Holland Tunnel, the tunnel that goes to Brooklyn is, and where they built the West Side Highway. From there all the way up to the West Village. They tore everything down. So what's up there now, they kind of planned in 1953, the Rockefellers, had long-term planning. I mean, the Rockefellers, kids, did you know that the Rockefellers own the United Nations? They, the property of the United Nations, why it's in New York City, because the first United Nations was in San Francisco, because that was more in the middle of the world. I mean, it was right on the Pacific and right in Europe, and that was the more righteous place to have put it, and that's where they did after World War II. They put the United Nations in San Francisco. But in the late 50s, late 40s, early 50s, the Rockefellers moved it to New York City because they owned the property right there on the East River. They had their architect, who was building them the Brazilian capital, build that building because that's where the new world capital was supposed to be, in Brasilia, which is a factory right in the middle of the rainforest. I mean, big, gigantic factory, big, when I keep saying factory, industrial cultural center, not a city. City is built on individual people building community. Cities like Brasilia is a factory because it was all built at once. The United Nations, not built on a community, is built as a commercial enterprise by the Rockefellers. And then they gave the first $50 million to run the UN all the way through the end of the Korean War. And that's why it was called a police action, because they wanted to have wars that they could own, that didn't have to go through the U.S. Congress. The United States has had all of these wars, 182 wars since World War II, and we have never, ever had to, the Congress is supposed to declare war, not the president or Nelson Rockefeller. Anyway, see how all this connects? So, there I am living at, with Phil and Jane Bear at the Bauer Gallery. And so we're there, fixing it up, getting ready, starting to having shows and stuff. And Ralston's this performance artist. And no one else is doing performance art. But he coined the phrase. I wonder if you go on Wikipedia, if you Wikipedia or Google Ralston Farina and performance art, I wonder what will come up. I bet you nothing, because there's so many great people I know who invented amazing things, and they got no credit. And instead of whining about it, I did all kinds of amazing things, and I never whined. I just moved on to the next one, And my whole thing was, if you're going to give me access to information that no one else has, I'm down. If you're going to pay me really well for the time I'm working for you, I'm really down. I don't need a career, don't need insurance, I do now. Too bad they weren't taking care of me now, but all those guys who I took care of, they're all dead. And all of their enterprises, which were their empires that they thought would last forever, are now corporate entities. And they're being run by artificial intelligence. I think I've told you, the thing that got me really sick was I worked for desperate lawyers. I was a negotiator. And, I had this, I never was not able to work it out amongst the parties. I was never not able to get everyone to sign the contract, even though they all hated each other, and every lawyer in the book couldn't get them to work, and the ombudsman couldn't do it. That's when they called me in. I get them to do it. So I was Mr. Miracle, right? And that's another story. But I did that for 10 years, and I lived like them. I worked no more than 11 weeks a year and made, if I wanted to, a 6-figure salary, but I didn't. I didn't need that much money. 50 to 200 grand a year was fine by me. And I would make investments and do this and do that and travel and go anywhere I wanted and eat anywhere I wanted, and that's why I gained 200 pounds. I went from my 210 that I am now to almost 500 pounds. And that's what, gave me diabetes, neuropathy, and all the other fun things I have. And that's what happened to all of these powerful imperial characters, And they thought they were so powerful. They made Donald Trump is a nebbish compared to these folks. These folks had serious money. That's why Donnie doesn't show us his taxes. Did you read that article in the New York Times about his daddy giving him over $100 million over the years, and how they cheated on their taxes, for $1 billion. Why he's a billionaire was that he cheated, $1 billion off his taxes. Now, don't believe anything I say. Go to Google, And Donnie was put in power as a He's a guy with a sledgehammer. And he isn't changing, Obama was probably the most, nasty. He killed more people, not more than Dick Cheney, but almost, He was no saint. He was no really great guy. All of you white people out there are probably more African American than he is. And all the stuff that Donnie went on. Look at his birth certificate. I mean, all of this. Donnie is just like John Birmingham. He's that canary in a coal mine. He can't help himself. That's what's so great. He's the X-lax of this body politic. He is the guy who is making diarrhea out of our culture. Our government that was there to oppress. I mean, everybody, we need a smaller government, blah, blah, blah. Stop all those welfare mothers. Well, the only welfare mother there is Goldman Sachs, because it's a motherfucker. And my grandma always said you can use the word fuck if it's appropriate. Now, I've just talked for an hour and 26 minutes. I wonder if Google will disconnect me now. But, that's why I have my blog as XRATTED, X-rated. It's really X-rated, but X-rated .blogspot.com, because I say things in a written form there that the person who can't suspend their disbelief gets upset with. People who have a worldview that they can't open their mind past it get upset with. And I use grammar and spelling as metaphors, The only real kind of feedback I've gotten on my writing is, anal retentive. Boy, you can't spell. And you don't use any periods. You just use semicolons. And at the beginning of sentences, you don't use capital letters. And what's this star next to words that I don't understand? In the very beginning, I say, hey, everything you don't understand, there's going to be a colon there, or a star, what do they call that thing? And in the back is the general directory. And I had a good buddy who wrote the Illuminati trilogy. He lived in Westbeth, and I lived in Westbeth. And Westbeth was so cool because it was a gigantic big building, maybe 100,000, 200,000 square feet. And because all of the rich people wanted to live in Soho, but the powers that be kind of knew that if they dissed the artist, their golden, duck would go. So they took this one big building, because they were building the Long Lines building, and fixed it up into little lofts, like 1,200 square foot lofts. And they all had great windows, and it had an amazing view of the East River, the Hudson River, it was an amazing place. And they had a theater in it and a gallery in it and a place where you could have meals. And it was like the retirement home for guys like me. Too bad it got sold as a condo in the 1980s. But anyway, from, 74 until 88 or whenever, when I left, it was amazing. And it was the creme de la creme of artists. So all these really great people who may not have known each other now are partying like it's 1999. So Robert Anton Wilson is my buddy. And so that's what he did. He put a general directory of stuff that people, well, what's this? And, and it was like a third of the book. So my novels all have general directories in them. So back to Una Bear Gallery. So we're starting to do performance art. And I'm like doing this thing where I've rolled my gigantic Tesla coil, and I'm turning the whole gallery into a cloud chamber. And that's it's kind of a poor man's version of a particle accelerator. But because I couldn't, put people inside it and make it a vacuum because that would kill them, I put, a closed environment with plastic, and I had buckets of dry ice. And I put water and dry ice together, which makes, fog. And I had bottles of exotic gases because I had worked in a foundry. Joe Battles foundry up in the Bronx. And, so foundry has all these crazy gases too, because, when you're forging metals, and he was like the space shuttle, he could make metals like you couldn't believe. And you do that because when the metal, you mix like baking. You put ingredients into the mix. One of them, to make really highly sophisticated metals, you use inert gases in there, argon, all these very crazy gases. And so I worked there, and I was the closest guy to an engineer he had, and I was making him very exotic power sources because we weren't just dumping vast amounts of current in a cauldron to melt up the things. I was putting in different frequencies, and we were putting in scalar energy to make these very sophisticated metals. Anyway, so I had real access to some pretty high tech, and so he came from the DARPA side of the universe, and he was my first foray into DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Program. And he had been, you name it, he had been in the military. He was the guy who told me everything about everything. And, when he was a young man, he was, a SEAL, he's part of the SEAL Corporation, which came out of California. And they developed the technology to make the Navy SEALs because they were looking to make like, Captain America, someone who could get shot and keep running at you, someone who could be torn up and still fight, someone who wouldn't die. And I met Joe at Duke because in '68 I was at Duke, and I had a girlfriend who is she was a shrink, she was a doctor, and she was getting her other PhD in parapsychology. Here's another brilliant woman. And, she couldn't ever find a boyfriend because they were scared of her. Even though she was gorgeous, but she was brilliant, and no one could understand. I could understand everything she was saying, but I wasn't, a shrink. I wasn't, I was I studied all those things. And I let her, she's the smart one. I'm with her, and we would have sex until the cows came home, and whatever little that floated her boat, I was all ready to do, I was never, oh, you can't do that. Jesus says no. So majority of the women I've always been with have been brilliant beyond belief, about to take over the universe, and hadn't been laid in years because all the men were jerks, and they'd roll into me, and I was Mr. Perfect. And yes, I was a little, but that endeared me to them. And whatever I needed to clean up, I would do because I love them. If this makes you more comfortable for me to never lead a dirty plate in the sink, not a problem. I never really did. I may not clean those dishes as much as they may want in their anal retentiveness, but good enough for me. And then they'd all be in the drying rack, and all the 98% of the crap would be off them. And if they had to wash it again to feel good, they felt good about that. It was like I was making a special treat for them. Anyway, that's where I met Joe. And then Joe went off and did weird things in Southeast Asia, not just Vietnam. I mean, the stories he had about Thailand and Cambodia, the whole thing with Pol Pot, that was like a CIA, little mind control. And that was all an experiment, And we were there from 1942 till 1982. Just like, Afghanistan, we never left. And the only reason we attacked Afghanistan is because the Taliban were the only people who shut the CIA's opium fields down. The only people who stopped opium production in Afghanistan was the Taliban. And that's why we went to war with them. Not because they knocked down the World Trade Center. The people who did that was the Mossad and Saudi Arabia. And that's why this little test is going on with Saudi Arabia. Because they did a whole bunch of stuff that if they spill the beans, ooh, baby, that's going to be the end. And that'll be the end of them. But they're crazy, mofos, you know. They're guys who are happy to be out there riding their horses in the desert. They don't need cities, cars. Now, the younger ones are getting more and more addicted to the materialism thing, like BMS? Anyway, so all of these things that I'm saying, don't believe me. Do not believe me. But go check it out. It'll blow your mind. There's a great radio show called Alternative Radio. And if you went on alternativeradio.org, you find them. And then there's another thing. This guy used to have like a religious, theological show. And then it's called Progressive Spirit, I think. You want to branch out. And if you went on progressivespirit.org, woo! Now, all of you guys who are my family, the almost 200 of you, you need to get, if each of you guys and gals, when I say guys, it's pejorative, meaning all of you. I mean, I could call all of you men, come on, girls, let's get it together. I used to all the time. It's each of you who are my family here, my adepts. It's each of you got 10 people to subscribe and become part of the family. That would be more than enough. And maybe, I might get some commercials, maybe the algorithm would pick up, because it's pretty obvious that people aren't being brought to me unless you guys, because every one of you have told me how hard it was for you to even find me because John wouldn't pass the word. Meaning I had to keep, laying down, hey kids, I'm over here on the comment page, and he would erase them, I mean, and he's still, meaning John does stuff like that. I just have to shake my head. I don't understand. I mean, there is no reason. It's actually counterproductive. My thumb keeps hitting that button. Yeah, Bucks. Too bad. I'm living quite nicely. I'm living, as my grandmother would say, live like a millionaire, don't be one. And I'm still living like one on, $540 a month. And that's for everything. Meaning when I drive the 200 miles here from my deep forest green, it cost me roughly $60. And I almost didn't make it. It's going, it's getting cold. The frost. And when I woke up, the frost, that was too much. And that's why I called up John, because he kept texting me, let's go to California. Oh, I want to go see So I said, okay. And normally I say, no, I'm busy. But this time I said, sure, I'm going to come. We'll work it out. And, I got here. He was like ready. When we ease into endeavors, that's how they're successful. Well, you guys are jumping ship. I'm from about almost down to 5, and it's been an hour and 39 minutes. So now this is this section is the never-ending story. So I'm going to be listing it as 40 days, 40 nights, the never-ending story. Okay. So we're still counting down the 40 days, but we're only at probably day 7-ish, kind of. Anyway, but I'll leave you with the what happened at Bear Gallery. So we're going on, and we're having a great time. And Ralston is actually making us kind of famous because he's doing all this crazy performance art. And I mean, he was brilliant. He was Mr. Marketing like you couldn't believe. It was just when people wanted to be nice to him that he would be just the cruelest to them. So anyway, we're trying to get crowds because of his performance art. And I was like, putting people in a vacuum chamber and putting them in a cyclotron, so they could feel every atom in their body. That was part of my alchemy, right? I was trying to get the gold out of all these rich people. And I got a couple of pictures of it, but it's pretty amazing because know, everyone had long hair. It was standing straight up, and I was cycling it, so their hair was going back and forth and in circles and weaving itself into braids. Anyway, and so this was, we had a nice little interesting show, and Phil and Jane just loved each other. So part of their thing, they would sit in this like, Grandma and Grandpa Moses chairs, rolling joint after joint and putting it on a silver tray. If you wanted one, you went over, picked a joint, and this was pretty good stuff. And so they would climb up into that box. The big window was on Broome Street, and that was their bedroom. That's where they would live. And for almost a whole year, they were naked and either sitting in the chairs in the gallery naked, talking to people naked. And we had, so we had paper, construction paper on the windows of the gallery. So if you were on the street level, you couldn't see what was going. You had to walk into the gallery. And we had a sign saying, hey, this is not for children. If you have a weak stomach or if you are, naked flesh upsets you. And if you're a sleazeball, So we did that. And like I said, we had some serious connections with the art world and the political world. John Lindsay was my bud. He used to come all the time and hang. So, and so did Abe Beam when he was a congressman. Anyway, so having sex all the time. And so the only people who could see them doing that were either truck drivers or people in Greyhound buses. So that was, so we invented, actually, Ralston Farina coined the phrase performance art. But we were the first people really to go nuts. I mean, there were other people doing their own thing, but they were called entertainers. Anyway, so we did that. And so we were one of the other, then the 57th Street guys came. But all the time I'm still connected with Richard Heyman doing the Ear In, but I'm doing all this other stuff. And I was still doing, for about a year and a half after we went in there, maybe 2 years, I still did Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, dumpster restaurant. Because that was, I could make a serious, I took half, for the money, for the food, I took more than half of that. And the other went into the kit for the bar. And by that time, Richard was making a fortune on the bar because it was like the only bar around. And all the art, all the rich people, and then all these artists were putting art because they had big, tall walls. And we were hanging, and I lit it like an art gallery, And we never painted. We painted the wood. We refinished the wood, but the yellowing vomit green paint from 1938 we kept. And I in the dining hall I would go uptown to Park Avenue, and people would throw out all kinds of great lights and lamps and furniture and tables and chandeliers. So I had all these great crystal chandeliers, like about 20 of them over the tables. And I had living room furniture around, in the corners where you couldn't quite put a table. We didn't want booze. We just wanted it. So where the tables were, it looked like a French small restaurant, but surrounded by 1950s Aunt Zelda's plastic-covered couches and chairs and lamps and tables and books. Richie and I had a lot of books. So the books that weren't near and dear to our hearts, or when I found tons of books just being thrown away, I would bring them back there. So it had a very comfortable setting, and it had a very, very, very cosmopolitan European setting and a total alcoholic setting. And basically, the bar, you could smoke like a chimney. And I built a glass wall between the bar and the dining room. And the dining room, we never put the wall back up. As we threw more garbage into our backyard, it kind of got up there, and we built a deck out over there and surrounded it by that plastic, that we didn't use for the awnings. Anyway, so the second year the garbage in the back shifted to the point where it it dropped, and the deck pulled the upstairs, the middle part of where our living room was, out the wall into the backyard, right over the dining room. And luckily it happened on a Monday night. And Monday and Tuesday were our closed days. I mean, the bar was open all the time, pretty much. But the restaurant, the closed walls there, the dining room was open to where our living room was. And you could look into the bedrooms, and that added to the cachet of culture of the year in. Anyway, so that's going on about year two. I'm now living more in the year in. I mean, over at the whatchamacallit, Bear Gallery on Broome Street, and that's doing pretty good. And then that's when Soho started getting bought by rich people, the buildings, right? So our rent went from $500 a month to $5,000 a month. And the guy who owned OK Harris kind of knew that guy and we leaned on him. And he, so we made a deal because that building was wired like in 1890, and he wanted to make, loft apartments, and no one would do it because it was just too weird of a building. And so I said, listen, I'll put in a new electric service for, how many loft apartments you're going to have? 20. I'll put in 20 meters, a brand new three-phase 1200 amp service, risers, panels, and I will, be the GC for your whole job here. All I want is, you pay for all the materials, you pay for all the laborers' salaries, you pay me X when the job is done, and you still just take our $500 rent for the next 15 years, because I thought that Phil and Jane would be done with that place by then. And we'd probably move out, but if we had 15 years, we could then rent it to some other moron and charge them like 20 grand a month. So we struck the deal. I did the deed. And so I had a lot of time in that basement, right? So it was a very interesting basement. Like I said, it's made out of brick and had these vaulted ceilings, and the only light came from the sidewalk, from the skylight sidewalks. And so I'm working on it, and I got, I put a whole new entrance into the basement because I was tired of having to go through the gallery to get down there and go down. So I put in a real, open, gigantic, they were going to put in an elevator. So I made a lobby, and off the lobby was a door that had a very nice staircase that went down to the basement. And then next to that, I had a one of these things that's like an elevator, one-story elevator that comes through the side. It has like open metal doors. You push the button, it kind of rises up. You roll things onto it, push the button, it goes down. The door's closed. No one falls down. So I did all that. And I was going to make that my shop, my studio, because I had already lost my Worcester loft. Because what I did with that, the yuppies were coming in. I was getting, annoyed with all the yuppies in my neighborhood. So I sliced my 7,000 square foot loft up into 7 1,000 square foot lofts. I brought, real electricity because I put in a real service in that building too for the guy who bought that. And I made a deal with him. I said, okay, listen, I still have that loft for X amount of time. I'm going to slice it up into smaller lofts, not like yours, and I'm going to basically sell those lofts. And it was called a key fee, meaning I didn't own it, but I did own the key to the front door. So I sold all of those keys. It's called a key fee. And they would get the lease to the landlord. And the the lease was way in the landlord's favor, right? And so the landlord was going to make, out of those seven lofts, he was going to make like 20, 30 grand a month. And that's while he was still paying a lot of money on trying to fix the place up. So that was a good deal for him. Meaning I did that within 2 months, put up the walls, put up the service, brought in, gas service and water and septic, and I did all that. And I got the key fee. And it was well worth what I went through. And then I, again, went over to Ireland. So anyway, and hung out with, was that the last time? I think that might have been the last time, because that was before I met Donna on the subway. And so, I'm, living in the Broome Street Gallery. And so I put in the service, I fixed up the basement, and we own, I'm going to use the basement. I told the guy who we get the ground floor in the basement. You get everything else. There's a common part of the basement where the meters will be, and the meter guy can come in, but the rest, me. Okay. So I got that. And as I'm doing all this work, this old guy, really old guy, he looks like, the guy from, the really tall guy with the gray hat and white beard who almost looks like me, but I'm better looking. What's his name? Who was Bilbo's buddy. Anyway, he was everyone's buddy, just like me. French guy walks up and goes, but this guy wasn't as nice. He was like, there was something very, unsettling about this guy. His name was Gilles. And he goes, can I look at your basement? It reminds me of home. I said, where are you from? He goes, oh, I'm from France. I said, okay. So we go down, take the elevator down, we go through the door, and he's like, can I rent this from you? And I said, nah, I want to use it, right? So he would come back virtually once a week for a month or two, And I had three other shops. I had one in Midtown and another building that I put a service. Every place I would do a big job in, part of the deal was, hey, I'm going to get a place where I can keep all my tools and my materials while I'm doing this job. And after it, I got it for, however long we make the deal for. And I don't have to pay rent. And it was great because when I worked in Midtown, I didn't have to drive all the way down or someplace, I would have these little cachets. And if I got tired or drunk in a club in Midtown, I had a little bedroom and a shower in each one of these things. And so he keeps bugging me, and I haven't used it yet. So I said, okay, what do you want to pay rent for? And I said, it includes electricity and heat, because I didn't want this guy to have a utility bill. And he goes, I would give you $2,500 a month. And that was I was thinking $300. And I go, and I don't say anything, and my mouth opens, and I take a breath in like I just did. And he goes, in cash. And I said, so that's first month, last month, and 1 month security. And he opens up his briefcase, which he always had, and it was full of $100 bills. 2,500 times 3, you do the math. And he hands it to me. I said, he said, no lease. Shake of the hand. So I shook his hand. So I go upstairs and I tell Phil and Jane the story, and they go, what? And I go, yeah. And they needed some money, so I gave them $1,500, and it was getting to be winterish, and I had no really big projects, so I took a nice little vacation in the warm lands I used to go to Jamaica and St. Kitts and Tortola. Those were all places. Again, I have stories about those places too, which I will. If you saw The Girl with a Scar, that's about Tortola. And only about her, not the whole story of Tortola. Anyway, so Gilles moves in. And he's an old guy. He's down there. We never really see him because he has another, the door entrance is on the other side of West Broadway. We don't ever see this guy. And then all of a sudden, I start hearing whips, chains, and people crying, "Harder, Gilles, harder!" Right? And we only hear it at strange times and at certain parts of the loft, meaning we didn't hear it over where we lived. We didn't hear it in our kitchen. We didn't hear it in the main part of the gallery or their studio or where the kids, by this time, Bill and Jane had kids. It was only over in this corner by the front door where there was an air shaft that came from the basement and went out into the street right by our front door. And so, if you were standing over there, yeah, you would hear this. And not all the time, but usually like, somewhere between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. So we're going, well, whatever. We're getting, and he would just leave the envelope of money. He put it through the mail chute on, the first day of the month at when we get up at 7 in the morning to get the kids their breakfast. There'd be an envelope on the other side, and he'd have these little hearts on it and little kisses, and there'd be, the rent in cash in the envelope. And, I'd always give the kids some money and Bill and Jane some money. And when I say the kids, the next thing, so we're doing performance art and running a thing like this, we were not a 501c3. I hadn't gotten into that gravy train yet. And so there were times when we, had lack of funds. We never thought about money. We just spent it. you know, we always, I was like Grandma said, live like a millionaire, don't be one. So, but it would always, something would, I'd get a job, I'd get a gig, I'd sell a painting. Gilles would throw an envelope through the thing, so, needed, Jane go, oh, I haven't paid the electric bill in 4 months. I said, well, Jane, well, I needed marijuana. That's more important, And because I was a master electrician by this time and was, solid with Con Edison, and I would see the head inspector at least once a week, and I'd say, hey, listen, we haven't paid, oh, yeah, Jane, she had to have her commodity first, right? Everyone knew about this because when Phil and Jane had their babies, everyone who was, the electric meter reader, the policeman, you name it, was there for Jane's birth, especially of North. Una was a different story, and I'll tell you that one at a later date. So we needed game shows, and the one she loved the best was Hollywood Squares. So Jane was a sculptress. She could build, she welded, she built, she had Una down there with the goggles on, So what she builds is a metal thing of the the 9 squares, the tic-tac-toe board, and they're each a 600 square apartment. And this is like Hollywood Squares. These people are they're like gerbils right on top of each other. And these are all, bourgeois kids out of art school. Daddy's paying their bills or they're going to school. And so they're not thinking about money. And if they wanted, they wanted to live in Soho. Well, at this time, if you wanted to live in Soho, you were paying 10, 15, 20, $100,000 a month, God knows what it is now. And I mean, man, last time I went there in 2011, there was a 60-story, I think hotel in Soho, like where, never a building taller than, 6 floors because you had to walk upstairs. It was like mind-boggling. Why I would never live in Manhattan today is that they have all these unbelievably tall buildings with thousands of people living, thousands of toilets, and their shit is hundreds of feet above the street level. And when they flush that toilet, the shit is hitting the sewers like at the speed of light, and they explode in the sewers, and all the gas gets, because the street storm drains are the sewers. And so all that smell comes. So all of Manhattan now smells like a diarrhea farm. Like I say, Donald Trump's town is, where Trump Tower is, he is the X-lax of the body politic. And all of this stuff is interconnected. You see what I'm talking about? It's all interconnected. So Jane's there, and her mother, who hasn't really seen Jane since she went off to Berkeley 30 years ago, hasn't seen her grandchildren. And because, they say, well, why don't you come back to the Midwest? And Phil and Jane said, no, we're busy. And can I come? And so anyway, her mother was, not doing too well. And her father told Jane. And so Jane said to her mom, well, why don't you, the kids are young. Una was like 4 and North was probably 1. And she goes, this is a great time. Why don't you come on down? And, we got a place where, Jane builds her an apartment. Copy of what her mother's little room was like, because her mother had her own room away from her father. She didn't want to have to deal with her father. Anyway, so her mother comes in with a little suitcase, and she walks from the bus station down Broadway, which then hits, goes, which is Fifth Avenue, which then goes into West Broadway. And she just walked straight down like 60 blocks. It was a beautiful day. But, she went through like 90 different cultural zones. And she was like the whole way down. She just kept walking because she had the address. And Jane said, it's right on the corner of Broome and West Broadway. You can't miss it. The front door is right there on the corner, because it was this curved steps going up there. So it's like, I don't know, 2 p.m, knock, knock, knock. And Jane's mom comes in, and it's like, she's like in shock. And Jane's naked, sitting in her lazy boy, rolling joints, and the girls are in, well, not North, but Una is, our grandfather. I mean, nothing's too good for these 2 little girls. And Jane, he loved Jane. And so Jane, whatever Jane needed, Jane got from Mike's business associates. So anyway, and the cops, they were part of that crew too. So there was never a question of like zero tolerance or anyone bothering us. It was because, man, I got the story about Jane's first child and the cops. So anyway, and it's like, and Jane gets up and she had like, what ladies wear in the morning, their robe. She kind of, puts it over and puts the belt in. Oh, mom, here, look at the girls. And her mother is like in shock. She can't say a word. She can't, right? And there's, and over to our left is the, Hollywood squares of people's apartments. And those folks, they are, half of them were transgendered, before transgender was transgender. And this is 1975. So Jane says, who's calling? Well, that was Johnny Boy trying to interrupt the storyline. 2 hours and 5 minutes. So anyway, so Mom, I was expecting you next week. She goes, oh no, I think I told you I was coming today. And she goes, Mom, wouldn't you love to hold North Bear? Oh yes, let me hold the baby. Let me hold the baby. Let me hold the baby. I want to hold the baby. So Jane puts North. It was like already a little woman. She's wearing clothes, and she was a great little one. I mean, both North and Una were the best of little kids because they're surrounded by this total insanity, and they were the grown-ups. I remember when Una was 5 and she was going to Catholic school at 5, and she would wear her uniform everywhere, this like plaided uniform, and she would walk to school because it was just around the corner, But at 5, she would walk to school. And, there was no, this is before kindergarten, but Mike Pinelli, went to Father Mahoney and said, hey, she's in. Here she is. Oh, what a cute little girl. No problem. Gave her the uniform. Anyway, I remember when she was 5 and she's wearing her uniform. We're having breakfast and no one's up. Everyone's, and there's like stone people on the floor, and and Una looks at me and goes, why do I have to be the parent? I said, Una, you're a Capricorn. You must love this. You're making order out of total chaos, and you have, there's no one here even questioning that you're in charge. You're in charge. And she thinks about it. She goes, Al, you're right. You're the only other sane one here. I said, well, coming from you, Una, that's a big compliment. I love that. So anyway, Jane's mom's about to lose her mind. We stick the baby into, Jane's mother's arms, and Una goes to me, Al, why don't we take Grandma down to meet Uncle Mike, meaning Mike Pinelli? And I said, yeah. No, she actually would call him, she once called him Uncle Mike, and he said, never call me that. And she goes, what? She goes, that has very sinister implications. And when you become 17, I'll tell you. But for now, call me Grandpa. That's what, I am a godfather. I am your godfather, but call me Grandpa. But what happens when, just call me Pop then. Okay, Pop. So Una goes, Al, let's go visit Pop and have some ice cream. And Mike, he owned every restaurant, you name, Luna's, you name it. He owned it. Other people fronted it, and there was a gelato store that was on the back side of his bar. And he had a door that went out to the bar and went out to the gelato store. So we walk in to Mike's office through the gelato store, and he gets up and he comes over to Jane's mother, and Jane and her mother look very similar. Same ravishing body, beautiful face. They had this Nordic background. Anyway, so Mike gets up and just, who is this angel? Look at this movie star, and just really start. He could, charm anybody or kill them, either way. And he goes, you must be Jane's sister. You're just, and I love Jane. And Una, who's this? And she goes, this is my grandma. No. And Una makes I'm just standing there, and Una goes, Grandma, this is Pop. And so he goes, what do you want? Do you want Italian food or gelato? And Jane's mom goes, what's gelato? He goes, oh, it's gelato. And they go in, and he makes it for them right on the marble table. I don't know if you've ever seen gelato being made, but he's making it. And anyway, they become best of friends. He goes, so are you married? Because he was about to take her up to his private apartment right there and then. She goes, well, yes, I'm married. I'm married to a minister. And it's difficult. We don't quite have a relationship. And he goes, well, I understand. I'm also married, and my wife, she has her own things. And I have mine. And we have children and grandchildren, and we share all of that. And we're very nice to each. She goes, and you're nice to her? I says, I wish my husband was nice to me. And he goes, do you want me to take care of that for you? And Una goes, no, Grandma, no, you don't want Pop to take care of that for you. And so he goes, well, while you're here, I'm going to be your New York emissary. I'm going to be your best friend. And he goes to Una, you left your sister's carriage here. Get it out. So she gets out the carriage, and he goes, from now on, and it was like a roadster, It could carry two, Una could sit in the back or the front, and the baby could sit. Right. So he says, put the girls in this and roll down Spring Street to my office, and all traffic will stop for you, because everyone knew, this is, Jane's little girls, and Jane's little girls and Jane are protected by Mike. So, trucks would stop, buses would stop. You could go against traffic and it would stop. So, and it was like Jane's mom was so innocent and just was like, couldn't believe, just, it was, everything was like going right over her head. But once she had her friend Mike and that she saw how beautiful and just great her kids were, even if her daughter, who she knew was off the hook, was sitting in an art gallery naked rolling joints, was, it was all good. She could like navigate this. Anyway, so, Jane's mom, and she has her own little room and everything's great, and she gets to know the kids in the Hollywood squares, and she sees them as her nieces and nephews, even though basically everybody in that crew was LGBT and black. And so she was like adjusting quite nice from arriving in shock to becoming a New Yorker. She even got to be able to get on the bus and go to the museums. I took her once for a real tour of the museums, and she would take the girls. And there was a subway stop one block that way and one block, like when they were putting them in, they put them right in Mike Finelli's neighborhood, the 7th Avenue over there and the IRT over there. And so she actually, when I first took her on the subway, she was like petrified. I said, no, this is like it's a vertical elevator, not a problem, And the subway was 15 cents then. Anyway, so everything was kumbaya, and Jane's mom loved it, And so one night she wakes me up, and she goes, I think someone's being murdered in the basement. I said, nah, that's just Gio. He's got strange habits. She goes, no, we have to call the police. I said, no. We'll check it out tomorrow. I'm putting in another service because the guy who bought the building, he had renovated the other side into like a mall. And so he kind of talked me into, bringing in a big service. It's going to have like 10, 15 Gucci stores there. This was Soho. And so I said, fine. So I was having the inspector show up. So I say, so when they come, they'll protect us. They're big, burly guys. And whatever craziness is going down there, they're like, one represents the city and the other represents the power, and they'll have their guys with them. So anyway, we go down there. And I'm, showing them the Edison box and all the things I've done and da-da-da, and just like the engineer wanted, and they're going, And Jane's mom's down there with us, and she's like, is this what you do every day? You make things? Well, this is so interesting. Wow, you can do this? I thought you were just an artist, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so I'm really more explaining it to her, and I turn around, and I say, where'd the guys go? And so I follow and I used Edison bars, not even cable. I used big, thick chunks of copper. It's called an Edison bar. So I follow that because I have all of the protective metal casing off it so they can see each connection. And I followed around, and there are these what are known as Ticos. And they're used in the film industry where they're like alligator clips. They're like, battery charger cables, but really big. And they're attached to the bars, meaning someone is stealing electricity because this is the Edison side, that's what side of the current. It's like before the meters. So I kind of follow those cables, and they go away from the meter room, and I follow them, and Jane's mother is right by me, and it's like she can't believe it. It's like going into the underworld. It's just like the Bible. And we go in there, and what is Jill making but S&M movies? And so he's got all these porno stars, guys, girls, dogs, you name it, doing it. And, they got all these fluffers, all these, cute young things, keeping the boys hard. This is like in the days before Viagra. And there are the inspectors with their pants down, getting fluffed. Because when they went and saw, they kind of kept walking and found the Ticos and then following the cables, and there were these bright movie lights, and they were like, "What are you doing?" And they were flipping up their badges, going, "We're going to arrest you." And Jill came and goes, "No, oh, no, sit right here, boys. Here's some young ladies who you'll like." That's how Jill talked, but with a French accent. I can't do the French accent. And they were getting fluffed. And Jane's mother went back into shock. I had to get a dolly to place her on and wheel her back up. And then she started smoking Jane's, that was the first day that Jane's mother smoked marijuana. And I think that's a good place to end 2 hours and 17 minutes of a live chat. I really enjoy this one, and I felt really good. Last night I was toast. So, again, I will try maybe later today. So this is All Things Are 40 days. All things are connected. And I'll put what day it is. So this was like day 7. But the next one I do is going to be 40 days. All things are connected. Day 7. Okay? Okay, kids. Love you. Do, 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 do.